John, can you just count to 3 for me?
1, 2, 3.
Well, hello, Hofstra fans, and welcome to another edition of our Q&A with Hofstra head coaches. I'm Stephen Gorchov, the Associate Director of Athletics for Communications here at Hofstra, and I'm excited today to be joined by our head baseball coach, John Russo. Coach, how are you doing?
Doing great, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on this week. How is everything going for you? How's the summer, and how has the last nearly 4 months been for you?
It's been obviously chaotic for everyone. I have 4 kids. I have a 16-year-old, 14-year-old, and 28-year-old. So, during this time, I've been a high school teacher, a middle school teacher, and a elementary school teacher. And so I've taken on definitely a lot more jobs than this being a baseball coach. But, this is what you have to do at this time, adapt. And, been in a lot of communication with our team, just making sure everybody's okay and, looking good going forward.
Yeah, you talked about managing both the family life and the job life. How has that been, just kind of doing that from afar? Because you're not, your players, you're seeing your players on Zooms and you're seeing your staff on Zooms. Everything is, it's a real different type of a situation, isn't it?
Been a big flip. Usually I see the family a lot on the FaceTime and always with the team, during the spring. And, now we flip flop that and seeing them on Zoom calls. And, I don't know how the world survived before Zoom. But that's been the way of business for us now. And, we're doing even recruiting calls and everything through Zoom, which, I think will change recruiting forever now that we have Zoom. And so we've been able to talk to families, from each coast during this time. And, the kids, I make fun of them. I don't think they're going to have another snow day the rest of their lives because of Zoom. And, I think Zoom's helped, us make it through all this time.
That's a great point about snow days for school and even colleges. They've kind of found a alternate option to keep the everybody in school, haven't they?
Yeah, my kids weren't happy about that, but I was like, you get more days in the summer by not having to waste one during the week. So
Hofstra fans, if you have questions for Coach Russo, put them in the chat window on the YouTube page, and we will get to them. We're looking forward to spending about the next hour with Coach Russo, talking about his career and his time at Hofstra and everything in between. And we're looking forward to it. So let's start there, Coach. You're a baseball coach. You spent your career in baseball. Growing up, did you just play baseball, or did you kind of dabble into a bunch of different sports?
my dad was a baseball coach and he coached my little league teams and everything, but he allowed me to play football and basketball. And in high school I played soccer and tennis and baseball. And so anything that had competition I liked to compete. And it wasn't until end of senior year, beginning of junior college, that I just really focused on baseball. But growing up in South Florida, there was just baseball fields and practice, and it was just baseball was second nature. And then I had the opportunity to go to Division II school and continue on with baseball there. And baseball has just focused everything since about, I don't know, 15 or 16 years old for me.
So growing up in your teens, when you're 15 and 16, what was your favorite sports team at that point?
I grew up in Vero Beach, Florida, which was home of Dodger Town. So the Dodgers were there, but I grew up a Braves fan because that was what was on TBS, and that,
That's
we got to watch them all the
hear.
time. And I was a big time Dale Murphy fan. Dale Murphy was my guy. And, some of my best days I can remember is my dad picking me up in lunch period and taking me over to Dodger Town to watch the 2:15 spring training games, and to get to see all the big leaguers play. And just to see them in a setting that wasn't in stadiums or on TV was such a cool thing growing up. And to be honest, that's just how I thought it was. And then I figured it out more as as it goes on. But I wouldn't trade growing up in Vero Beach, Florida for spring training ever.
Well, you kind of answered my next question. Was going to be, who was your favorite player growing up? Dale Murphy. Obviously, we're about the same age. And he played for the Phillies as well for a little bit. Was it maybe his quiet demeanor, his professionalism that you saw the greatness of the kind of player? Was that kind of it that you saw in him?
I've been a baseball purist. I definitely know it now as coach, but I guess even as a young age. And I think he just did everything right. And, he went about his business right. And, as I got older, I really was a big Derek Jeter fan. And, I really liked the way he went about his business. Don Mattingly, another, big fan. And so I liked the way that the guys played and carried themselves on and off the field was always a big big thing for me. And so then that definitely leads to coaching, where you worry about kids on and off the field. But players like Cal Ripken, playing every day, those just held so much weight. I thought that they were the coolest people in the world by the way they went about their business.
And then so you attended West Alabama. Well, what was it about that decision? I mean, you grew up in Florida. You're choosing to go to a college, and I'm not even sure where, somewhere in Western Alabama.
Exactly.
How did that come about, and kind of how did you go about deciding I'm going to take this big step in my life and moving to another state to start my life in college?
I was real worried about just ending up in my hometown, and everybody stayed in Florida. Florida was the best, and I really wanted to go away. So I talked to my dad about that, and my dad had a friend that went to Troy University, where Coach Smart, who's the head coach at West Alabama, went to, and was there at the same time, and was able to connect with him and give me an opportunity to go up there and visit with him. And I transferred into West Alabama in January. Games started in February. And I tell this to people a lot of times, like, you never know what's going to change or not change your lives. And truthfully, I went there and there was trailers and small town and, 2 street lights. And, 3 weeks into it, I hated West Alabama. I didn't think I was going to leave. And then my assistant coach talked me out of quitting, and he's like, hey, give it a chance, get the games. And so then we get to the first game, and it was Coach Smart's first game. And Coach Smart's now the head coach of Troy University, and I got to play him a few years back. But it was his first game as a head coach, and we ended up losing the game. But I don't know, him and I had some interactions during the game, and we became really close in just one game. And then, 3 years later, I could have been the mayor of Livingston, Alabama. I loved it so much and was so popular there. And baseball had just driven me to a bunch of things. And then Coach Smart gave me the opportunity to coach with him after my playing career. And then he's been a big influence in my whole life and every decision I made with baseball.
We'll touch on the West Alabama aspect too, because like you said, you became a coach, but you kind of opened up another question there. What was it like coaching against Coach Smart after all the years of kind of him being one of your mentors, I'd imagine?
So, I had looked forward to that game for a long time, because I was like, well, he was a Division I head coach. We were both Division II players, Division II coaches. He got to be a Division I head coach, and same for me. And I was like, I want to match up with him. I want to match up with him. And we got there the night before the first game, and I'm hanging out at his house, and his wife, Debbie Smart, and his son, Chase Smart, played for him. And Taylor Smart's the softball coach. And I'm at there, and my wife and me are at there, and we're hanging out. And then I'm like, well, I don't want to beat him. I felt bad. And then we ended up losing a game on Friday night in the 8th inning. Silas was beating them, and then we lost. But then on Saturday, game 1, we beat them. And then I had to shake Coach Smart's hand at home plate. And I just didn't feel that great about it. It's probably one of my worst wins of my coaching career because of just how much respect and how much I loved Coach Smart. And, then I was like, I don't want to ever play him again because I just didn't enjoy it. And I like beating people. And, but I didn't feel good about beating him as I thought I would.
Yeah, people always talk about actually the other way around, the person coaching against some of you that was one of your players, and that Coach Smart might have the same feeling that you had that day, but sounds like you had the feeling more than maybe him.
He's that way. I mean, he was in the Hall of Fame at Troy, and he's super competitive and really tough. And my wife to this day, I mean, she went to West Alabama, played volleyball there. She knows Coach Smart forever, and she still thinks to this day he doesn't like me because of how tough and mean he is to me. But nobody I look up to more and respect more. And we've agreed not to play again, but I mean, we're always rooting for each other, getting text after the weekend, after big wins, or keeping up. And so I always know how they're doing. He always knows how we're doing, and I owe him a lot.
And what was it about that experience at West Alabama that allowed you to, one, transition into a coaching position, and then you felt kind of lent you into your career?
My guess is just how much of an influence Coach Smart had on me. I thought I had it all figured out when I got to college, and thought I knew it all. And every day I'm doing something wrong or wasn't doing something right that I thought. And he and Shane Adams, who was the assistant, and then there was another assistant, Chris Jones, who I'm still in contact with this day and text with all the time. And just have how much they impacted me. And I thought they made me a better student. They made me a better man. They made me a better baseball player. Just everything about them made me better. And so I kind of, I thought I liked baseball, but I grew up, looking up to them. And, I like the fact that college kids, they think they know it all at 18 years old, but there's a lot of change that they're going to make between 18 and 22. And I've just felt really at home with that age group of being able to help them get to, where they want to go.
When you first became a coach at West Alabama, what did you oversee with the team, and what was kind of your area of expertise?
So I was an infielder, but Coach Smart obviously worked here. He worked with the infielders. So to coach for him, I had to do outfielders. And, one of his big worries was, hey, I just got done playing with these guys or around these guys. How's it going to be, coaching them? And, I just took it so serious right from day one, and I wanted to make it my life. And after the year, I remember him complimenting me, telling me that he didn't think I was going to be good at it or going to be able to pull it off because I had played with them. But to be truthful, I was just able to turn that switch off. They weren't my friends anymore. I wanted to coach them. And, that was probably the year I figured out that I could do it. I think that was 1998. And then I went up there and did it. And then, he ended up leaving in 2000. I got married in 2000. So then I went north and then started coaching at a school called St. Joseph's College in Indiana. And that was really where I got my stripes of, being able to do it on my own for the first time.
Yeah, you just mentioned kind of the next question. You have such a wide-ranging coaching experience from starting at West Alabama, and then, yeah, as you just mentioned, you moved on to St. Joseph's in Indiana. How does somebody go from Florida to Alabama to Indiana? How does that position come about?
So, I always say that all the time. I'm the only guy that, grew up in Florida, loves Florida, and I kept getting more and more north. And my wife was from Antioch, Illinois, which is, as far northwest as you can go on the Illinois Indian Wisconsin border. And so when we got married in 2000 and I wasn't going back to West Alabama to coach, she wanted me to find a job closer to her hometown in Antioch, Illinois. And so St. Joseph's College was about an hour and a half from Chicago and 2.5 hours from Antioch. And she was able to become an academic advisor there. And then I was able to coach there. So we were both working out of college, two things that both of us wanted to do. And um, we ended up spending 4 years there. And then I got a teaching job in her hometown, being an athletic director at a middle school. And so we moved back to Antioch, Illinois. And during that time, all that process, I was coaching in Vermont in the summers in the New England College Baseball League. And I did that for over 8 straight summers. And that was the first time I was my own head coach, was in Vermont. And so, yeah, I just had a lot going on in a lot of directions, and baseball was driving a lot of things. But then when we had my daughter Haley while in St. Joe's, we just wanted to settle down and get normal jobs, I think, after that.
Yeah, we kind of touched on it, the wide-ranging experience. You went back and you were a teacher in the Milburn School District, correct? Did I get that right?
Oh, I call it,
I did my. What's that?
called it the country club. I loved it there. It was a nice little middle school and really good kids, sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. And, life was good.
So you spent 4 years at St. Joseph's, and then your next step after that was kind of the Vermont aspect. You spent many years coaching summer ball up in Vermont, the Mountaineers. I wanted to kind of spend some time talking about summer baseball. It's got such a mystique about it in the country, and people love it, and especially in those towns that it really helps fuel those towns in those summers. Can you touch on the mystique and what makes summer baseball so special?
Listen, I love that you asked this question. I hardly ever get it asked a lot, but my summers in Vermont were, some of my best summers of my life. And I owe a lot, and we're still good friends with a lot of people in Montpelier, Vermont. Montpelier is the capital of Vermont, and it only has, around 8,000 people live in a small town. And, on any given night at a Vermont Mountaineers game, we could get 2 to 3,000 people, at a game. And then they average around 1,800. So that whole, Vermont Mountaineers, it runs their whole summer. It starts June and goes right to the beginning, about the second week of August. And I tell the kids right when they used to first get there, I'm like, here's the deal. You're first time in Montpelier, but everybody knows who you are. And so you're already a local legend before you even get there. And they take usually about a week to figure out that I wasn't kidding. But, these people have been researching them since February, been looking forward to them being a part of the team. And, they are really living and dying by every Vermont Mountaineer game. And it was such a cool thing. And I got to be there for the very first ever Vermont Mountaineer game. I was the assistant to Chris Jones, who was my coach in college. And then the second year I was the head coach. And 3 years later, we won an NECBL championship back-to-back summers. And so I became pretty popular in Montpelier, Vermont. But the things that I remember from it is like my wife getting to spend the summers there, my daughter Haley and Lainey getting to spend the summers there, and just of how nice the people were. And, back when we first got there, when the other team would hit a home run or score, the Montpelier people would be cheering for them and so excited. I'm having to teach them, hey, we don't root for them. We don't cheer when they hit a home run or they do something good. And, it was definitely a growing process, but I loved it. They'll be some of my best memories. And, obviously I had a really lot of good players. I had over 100 drafted players from that team. I had 15 kids that have made the big leagues that played in Vermont Mountaineers. So I coached some really good players, and some guys spent their summers there.
Yeah, and people obviously hear a lot about like maybe the Cape Cod League and leagues like that. What kind of touching more general, what is so special about those leagues that how do they help develop these players into, many cases, these players becoming professionals?
You know, the best kid I coached out there was AJ Pollock. He's the, center fielder for the Dodgers now and grew up Diamondbacks, and he was a first round pick, but out of high school he wasn't a draft pick. But at Notre Dame, he was their best all-time freshman hitter. Like he set their freshman hitting record, and he was, everything at Notre Dame. And then 2 weeks later, he's coming to, Mount Pillier, Vermont, and there's only 6,500 people, and AJ isn't any more popular than the next guy, and that was something really hard for him to deal with. And at first, he didn't like it, and then I was able to be like, man, this is great. You get to lift, you get to do stuff on your own, and you get to practice, and you know, kind of get to reinvent yourself this summer. And so what he did was he got really physically stronger and he started having fun. And um, he played under a big pressure at Notre Dame, but every day coming to the field, I can remember how much fun he was having. And he was a shortstop, third baseman, second baseman when he came to Vermont. And usually I would tell the kids, a day before they'd have their off day, and his day off was like on like a Thursday afternoon. And right 15 minutes before game time, our center fielder pulled his hamstring. And so I went, AJ, do you want to play today? And he goes, where's it at? And I'm like, center field. And he was all fired up. He was like, yeah, I'll go to center field. And he was looking around for a glove and he found one. And then he goes out to center field. And then his head coach from Notre Dame calls me. And the next morning, it's like, how did AJ look in center field? And I'm like, it's AJ Pollock. He can do about whatever he wants to. And he goes, well, if you could leave him out there, we're thinking about maybe moving him out there next year, and glad you did it for him. And, then he's winning gold gloves in the big leagues. And, he was just having fun. And that's the atmosphere I like, that the kids just have so much fun and they play with less pressure on them than they do the school year. And it's why I think they have such big years in the summer. They just learn more about themselves.
I guess touching on the COVID-19 pandemic and summer baseball, you kind of mentioned how important of an aspect it is to the development of the student athlete. How do you see this summer, where there's going to be little or no summer baseball, kind of affecting the development of many of these players, including your own on Hofstra's team?
I'm really worried about it because like we had, certain guys that I like. I think last summer was invaluable for Austin. Austin had a, good second half of the year for Hofstra, and became a really good player. I
Best
thought he
hitter in
should
the CAA, you're talking about, right?
not the best hitter in the CAA, but before he was the best hitter in the CAA, he was the best hitter in the NECBL in Vermont. And he got his confidence, at the end of last year, and then he was able to carry it on. And the NECBL is the second best summer league in the country behind the Cape, and he did it against really good pitching. And I think it just gave him the confidence. So then people see him come out, and hit a home run in the first at bat against Purdue, or he was leading the CAA most categories. Everybody was maybe surprised by that, but I think us as a coaching staff, the team, we saw that from him day one of the fall of last year, and I think that all came from Mount Pillier, Vermont, and being up in Vermont, and he just got that confidence, and it put him over the edge. And I think that does it a lot for a lot of kids. So that's what I'm worried about a little bit. But hopefully we'll have a good fall to be able to add to these kids' confidence.
And then the John Russo maze of the tour of the United States started in Florida, went to Alabama, Indiana, then a quick trip to Illinois, and now in 2008 it heads to Hofstra as an assistant coach. You're assistant coach for Patrick Anderson. How does that come about? And I can't imagine you've been in Long Island much in your life before that. Was the first time when you accepted the job, the first time you were in Long Island?
Well, so Patrick and I knew each other from 1988. I coached summer up in Zanesville, Grace. So I was actually Patrick's coach for a summer. And Chris Jones, who was my coach in college, was his summer coach 2 years before it and helped me get the job up there one summer. And it was independent baseball. And so we were together a whole summer. We became best friends. Patrick was in my wedding. I was in Patrick's wedding. And we'd always joked about coaching for each other. Like, hey, if you got a head job, I'd be your assistant. Hey, if you get a head job, we gotta coach together. And him and I were always in different spots. And one morning he calls me and he's like, "Hey, guess what? I'm going to be the head coach at Hofstra University." And I'm like, "Oh man, that's awesome." He goes, "Well, I want you to come coach for me." And I'm like, "I don't think I'm going to be able to talk Stacy and the kids to come to, Long Island, New York." And I was coaching in Vermont at the time of this. And so then we had a game that day, and I was driving back that night and I got a call from Patrick again. And Patrick's like, "Hey, I want you to come down and visit and see Hofstra and, coach for me." And I'm like, "Patrick, I just don't think Stacy's going to go for it." And he goes, "I talked to Stacy an hour ago. She already took the job." And so then when I got home, I talked to my wife and she was like, "Hey, we're 32 at the time and it's New York City, and, we can go try it. And if it works out, great. And if not, we can always say, hey, we visited and coached in New York City." And I was shocked. And a day later, I think we
Little did you know, 12 years later.
12 years later,
Go
still be a native. And and it'd be my longest place that I've settled down at. And so then we drove down, and Patrick saw it. And at once Stacy was in, I was all in, because I'd always wanted to coach with Patrick. He's a great baseball guy, and I mean, he was my best friend. So everybody dreams about doing that. And the one thing, we didn't know is, like, the team was in really rough shape when we got there. There wasn't many players. There wasn't much of a program there. The history was a little rough. And so we were, in the process of figuring out. Lucky for us, Patrick's wife coached there, so he had a real insight into a lot of things. And so the one thing I had to do is I just got to be the recruiting coordinator and just go bring in players. And so that's what I spent the first few years doing. And then, it was really neat to do that. And then that 2012 club, I'm sure we'll get to that, but that was a lot of the kids that we recruited right in that first year in 2008 and 2009.
Yeah, you kind of just touched on it. So you spent 3 years, 08, 09, 10, 4 years as an assistant. And then Patrick became the head coach. Was that the Hagerstown Suns that year? Yeah. So, wow, there you go. And they elevated you to the head coaching position in 2012. I imagine. Do you remember the day? So I asked all these head coaches when they become. When I'm asking about the first head coaching position, do you remember the day, the meeting, or the phone call?
I do. It was January 16th. I got a call the night before from Jack Hayes telling me I was going to be the interim head coach for the season. I got introduced to the team at 9:00 the next morning. Got over finally to my office around 11:00. I had a meeting with a player at 11, and then started coaching and getting ready right then. And it was really whirlwind. I had a Zoom call while we were over, this break, and it was with the 2012 team. And it was really neat to see their memories of everything, because I was such in a small, just my zone, I guess it was. And I was so focused. I knew every bit of my heart that team could be a good team. And I was going to do everything I could to make them good. And, I thought we had all the pieces, but the thing we didn't have was we just didn't have the history, or that team hadn't won before. And, a lot of teams at Hofstra hadn't won before, and it was getting them over that edge and hill. And I just, in my head, refused for them not to be good. But then it was funny to hear all of their takes on that year and stuff. And it brought back a lot of good memories and a lot of good times.
And Hofstra fans, again, if you have questions for Coach Russo, feel free to put them in the chat window on the YouTube page, and we'll get to them. So you keep referencing this 2012 Hofstra baseball team. It's a team that lives in lore and program history. It's they qualified for the CA tournament. Danny Poma with maybe one of the greatest seasons in collegiate baseball that year. It was just a remarkable year that kind of, I'm sure it gave you belief that what you were doing was right. And in the midst of, you were still the interim head coach. I believe in the midst of the year, you got the head job, right?
Yeah, like they had told me, think that they were going to post the job around May 15th and, put it up for a national search. And I was more than willing to apply for it and have a chance to get the job. but then I got the job full time around May 1st. They offered it to me. I actually got my job from President Rabinowitz. He offered it to me and made me full time coach May 1st. And so I got a meeting with him, and because Jack Hayes at that time was transferring, he went to Brown University, and then Danny McCabe had taken over as the full time AD. And he got me a meeting with President Rabinowitz, and President Rabinowitz gave me the head coaching job. I remember in there, and I was nervous, and I don't remember a lot of the conversation, but he's like, "So, John, do you want to be my head coach?" And I was like, "Yes, sir, I do." And the next thing I know, I'm the head coach at Hofstra University full time.
Yeah, it must have been a whirlwind 6 months from December through May. Uh, in the midst of coaching a team through maybe one of the greatest seasons in program history, your life is changing pretty much by the day, right?
Definitely, because at that time I was the assistant. I was supposed to coach that summer up in Vermont, and so I had to kind of keep that job because what happens if we have a bad year and I'm not named the head coach at Hofstra? I need a job in the summer, and so I was still running the Vermont Mountaineers at that time and recruiting and doing stuff for them. I was running our team, like, we're having all kinds of crazy weekends, and we're sweeping VCU and doing stuff that we'd never done in history, and then we were getting a lot of good coverage. And at that same time, Stony Brook was really playing well, St. John's was playing really well, so we had three great clubs within 30 miles of each other, just destroying college baseball. And we ended up being one of the top hitting teams in the whole country. And I remember we got on to Baseball America called me, and I was like, "What's happening here?" We weren't on the radar at all. And Baseball America is making us the game of the week against UNC Wilmington. And I think that was when it kind of struck me about midway through the season of what was going on.
And I guess let's talk about that team a little bit. Obviously, the main name on that team was really Danny Poma. It was just a remarkable year. What made that team and what made Danny Poma so special that year? If you could touch on both.
Yeah, so Danny was a great player, good kid. His junior year, he had a first team All CAA for us. And when I took over, I remember meeting with Danny, and I was like, "Hey, Danny, what's your goals this year?" And he's like, "Well, still to be a first teamer and all this." And I'm like, "Well, why?" And he's like, "Well, because I was last year." And I was like, "Exactly, you were last year." And he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I'm like, "Why can't you be an All-American?" He's like, "Coach, All-American, it's a little rough." And I'm like, "Why? You already a first team All CAA player. You could be player of the year." And um, I remember he went down to Florida State, and he had a really good weekend against Florida State. And then the next weekend, he was just okay against Notre Dame. And I met with him on Monday morning after the Notre Dame series, and I'm like, "Hey, man, you and I need to talk." And he's like, "Yeah, coach." And I'm like, "You threw your helmet after an at bat against Notre Dame." I said, "You can't do that." And he goes, "I got frustrated, coach, and all this." And I was like, I get that, but you're the best player on this team. And when you do that, everybody follows suit. I need you to be the best player. I need you to be the best leader. I need you to be the best." And from then, like, I've never seen a kid just go into his zone and have as many good weekends and be such a good leader and do everything right on and off the field. He won Mr. Hofstra that year, and did great in school. And if you ever saw him, he was always smiling, and he just something clicked in his head. And he ended up becoming, I think, one of the best, if not the best player in Division One baseball that year. He missed leading the country in batting average by a point. He led the country in doubles. Um, he had 28 stolen bags. He played a great defensive outfield. He had a game that he went 6 for 6 against New York Tech, and he ended up getting drafted that year by the Diamondbacks. And that was the game that the Diamondbacks scout was at. He had flown in from Arizona to watch Danny play in that game, and Danny went 6 for 6. He hit 2 homers, 2 doubles, and then he hit 2 line drives off the pitcher. And so, he couldn't have had a better day. And I remember the scout calling me from the airport going, "Hey, I've got to ask you." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Did Danny Poma really just go 6 for 6 in a game?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he did." And he was like, "All right." That was kind of, how everybody did. And, I think, a big hitting guy for me that year was Matt Ford, because Matt batted behind Danny, and he had a great year and had 50 some RBIs, and, never made it really easy to walk Danny. And then right in front of him was Dalton Rouleau. And I thought Dalton had a great year and was a big catalyst because his confidence and his swagger was exactly what Danny needed. Danny was such a nice guy, but Dalton gave him, a cockiness that was what Danny needed that year. And I think just all those guys just got along so good and, fought for each other. And I mean, we can name 20 some guys off that team that I loved and did it all for each other.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's been 8 years since you became the head coach here, and over that time, there's been a lot of transformations in your program and your facility. And really, one of the areas that we've seen the most change is University Field. It's gone from maybe a facility that needed a lot of work to one that's become one of the best in the area. You have a great facility. You got stands. You got there's recently batting cages added. Uh, can you talk about what's that meant to you and your program over the last, you've been here 12 years, but really as the head coach over the last 8, kind of that development and the donor relationships and all that area that has kind of meant the world to you and your program?
I remember like when Patrick and I took over that first day, he had an interview out at the field, and I remember seeing like an aluminum stand. Do you remember that? That was where the SIDs got to do the scorekeeping, and there was just cement behind there. There was like a big tall fence, and there was no stands and anything. And I remember talking to Patrick. I was like, "Hey, before we recruit any players, we have to start to work on this field." And he started laughing. He's like, "Hey, we got a lot to do." And so then we met Bruce Quinn, who was obviously a former player, and he was able to make an awesome donation for the grandstands. And then we were able to fix the outfield fences and start to fix the cages and everything. And a lot of that stuff I take for granted because I'm used to it. But last week we had a Zoom call with guys from the '80s, and it was players from the '80s, and they were telling me about playing across the street. And that one of the things that they love most is seeing the field and how much everything has changed. And we got a million compliments on just the batting cages that we added this year. And they were talking about how the batting cages were terrible when they were there and all this stuff. And it gave me a lot of pride in knowing that just them, that how much they watch and look for those things. And it helps with their memories of seeing the stuff get better and how excited they are when the field changes. And that's been a hidden thing of this COVID, is being able to get on these Zoom calls with classes from the '80s, '90s, 2012s, getting to reach out to a lot of people. And Brian Graff and Jerry have been helping us out a bunch, reconnecting with old alumni. And I think that that's going to help with fundraising and getting back and building relationships. And fundraising has been key for me the last 8 years. We wouldn't have been able to do near the things we've done, like go to Hawaii or the Dominican Republic or Texas A&M or some of the places we've gotten to be and seen without donations and alumni giving back. And that was one of the things I got to do on these Zoom calls, is just thank everybody and really appreciate everybody helping us out to make the program and the field better.
And you kind of touched on it there again. The scheduling over your 8 years as a head coach has been really remarkable. You've given your team some incredible experiences that not a lot of teams in college baseball get to experience. You've been to Hawaii, you played UCLA, you've mentioned a few others. You went to Dominican Republic for a trip for a season. I mean, I can't imagine there's many college baseball student athletes that have experienced anything like that. When you're making those schedules and you're providing those opportunities for your student athletes, what's the thinking that goes into that, and what's your goal for whether it's a trip to the Dominican Republic or if it's a trip to Hawaii?
No, college to me is a lot. Obviously baseball, but graduate Hofstra with a degree. But then after you get past the academics and athletics it's about memories, and it's about stories. And guys, even though we lost those first 3 games against FSU, the 2012 club talked about their players, for about 20 minutes. And then after that, they talked about Notre Dame's team and how they had 3 first rounders on it. And they talked about their players for like 20 minutes. And, that taught me a lot of, that's what the kids remember. And then, when I talked to John Rooney and, I asked him what is his favorite memory, and you're talking about got a CAA pitcher of the year. He had great Friday nights and beat a lot of people. He's like, hands down, coach, going to the Dominican Republic. And I'm like, what? And, that's what the kids remember. It's what they love. And, to be truthful and honest, I grew up a fan of college baseball and seeing all these places, but my two biggest memories that, obviously, 2012 team, all these teams, 2018 team, but the memories I have is being at Texas A&M opening night for 7,500 people, coaching third base in the first inning, the lights blinking, and the fans all swaying back and forth, and it looked like the stadium was going to fall down right on top of you. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. And then we scored in the first inning, and I'm like, well, it doesn't get much better than this. And then being at UCLA and shaking John Savage's hand, to open up the season right after he wins the national championship the year before. And I was like, this is pretty cool at Jackie Robinson Stadium. And so just as much as the kids love it, I love it just as much. And, thankful for the donors and the people that have helped us to make that happen for the players to get to visit all these places.
And a nice segue into our next conversation. You've mentioned them a few times. The 2018 team, another special team in Hofstra baseball history. And while the 2012 team was led by maybe one of the best hitters in the nation, the 2018 team was led by arguably the best pitcher in the nation, John Rooney. Let's talk about that 2018 team and just the unbelievable year that John Rooney put together. Can you touch on that? It became must-watch games. Everyone in Hofstra athletics would be like, "Where are you going?" "Oh, going out to baseball games. Going out to baseball stadium to watch Rooney's pitching today. It's a Rooney Friday, or it's a Rooney day."
Rooney Friday, hashtag
Yeah.
Rooney Friday. And that was amazing to me. Was like, Emily from the volleyball coach next door, she'd come over, she goes, "I'll be at the game." And I'm like, "Well, thanks, Em." Like she's
And she
like,
probably never seen a baseball game in her life.
never, but she knew Rooney was pitching. And, Simon be like, "Oh, we got Rooney on the mound." And then Richie'd be yelling, "Rooney Friday." And, everybody at the hall, he mesmerized everybody. And I, I think the thing that was most amazing to me is him and I met each week, and we would talk about the past weekend, we talk about the upcoming opponent, and was trying to really keep him focused on not getting too big, because you're talking, this is a kid from Hoosick Valley that, had about 1,000 people in it. And, he's wanted by, media, and then he's having 30 teams reaching out for him and wanting interviews and have coffee and, doing background reports and all this stuff on him. And he's also having to go to class, and he's having to worry about opponents. And I want to be super honest. And I've told a couple people this outside the circle, maybe not, on live YouTube before, but I kept waiting for him to have a bad game. I every game would start in the first inning, and I'm like, all right, so if Rooney's bad tonight, I'm going to go here. And just because I was the one seeing like all the other stuff he was dealing with was besides pitching, people are wanting him to fly here after the season's over, and they're wanting him to do this. And, I'll give John Habian a lot of credit, like him and Rooney would do a lot of their side stuff, just him and Rooney's to keep Rooney a lot, focused on pitching during the week and keep his mechanics straight. And like I said, my meetings was just to try to help him out with everything he was dealing with off the field. And, agents, at our games, and, 40 scouts. And I remember Omar Minaya coming up to me right before a game being like, "Hey, you got a good one here in this Rooney guy." And I'm like, "Aren't you Omar Minaya?" And he's a, special assistant to the Mets. And it was crazy.
Did pitching almost become his cocoon, if you might want to use that term, like to get away from everything?
I do. And, the best time to see him was on Saturday morning after he threw Friday. Like, he would be so loose and energetic, and, he would be in such a zone for that game on Friday night. And I remember we had a big game down at Elon, and Aaron Fitt from at that time was Baseball America. Now it's Division I baseball. He's at the game because they're throwing a kid Baranovich that's leading the country in strikeouts. He's going to be a first team All-American. John Rooney is going to be an All-American. And here's Aaron Fitt doing the game. And he's before the game, he's interviewing Rooney, which, I'm like, oh man, Rooney's going to be like, Aaron Fitt's here, I'm not going to throw well. So I remember, he didn't start off great that game, and he didn't have great stuff. And I'm like, "Habes, what do you think?" And he's like, "Well, we got to hope he settles in." And I'm like, about the fourth or fifth, he started to throw really good. And then we're up 1-0, and he gave up a double, and then they bunted him over. So guy on third, 1 out. And I had thought Rooney ran out of gas. And I go out there to visit him, and I'm like, "Hey, man, how you feeling?" He goes, "Coach, I feel great." And I said, "Well, here's the deal. I'm thinking about going to Weiss. I think Rice is ready." And he goes, "No way, it's my game." And I'm like, "John, I get it, but I think you're tired. You spend a lot of energy." And he's like, "No." And to be honest, if you knew Rooney, he would never talk back. He would never anything. And he got fired up. And to be honest, I liked it. And he strikes out the next guy. He strikes out the next guy. The pitches are the hardest pitches he's thrown at the game. He's hitting 94, and Aaron Fitz loving it, and everybody's loving it. And that was when I was like, man, this kid's a beast. I mean, he just took it to a whole nother level at that time, and nothing really seemed to phase him. He put 60 scouts in the stands. He threw great.
Yeah, I remember that game at the Omar Minaya game. There had to be 45 scouts, all with their guns, and Omar Minaya sitting amongst them, and every single person in the crowd was like, "Omar Minaya's here," you know. And it was a remarkable day. I mean, I remember it was a beautiful May day, and it was one of his probably last starts of his career at Hofstra, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, and I think if you remember, he made the play on the they tried to suicide squeeze on him, and he ran around the ball, flips it home, gets the guy at the plate. I think our catcher at the time is yelling, Vito, I think, was yelling, 1-1-1. Rooney gets the guy out at the plate. Everybody's going crazy, and a bunch of scouts after the game were like, "We know shortstops that can't make that play." And I'm like, "No, there's nothing I can put against Rooney that he can or can't do." And just to see what he came in as a freshman, and then what he left.
It's exactly my next question. His recruiting story is just remarkable because Hofstra was pretty much his only. You found him, and that was it. It was because, as you mentioned, he's from a small town, middle of the nowhere, and he wasn't really involved in summer baseball, right?
He wasn't. He was, you can't find him on Perfect Game. You can't find him on Prep Baseball. He's the last kid that'll ever be recruited at Hofstra that doesn't have a Perfect Game or a Prep Baseball New York profile. And in the summers, he would work at a country club, and he was an all-state basketball player at Hoosick Valley. And he, baseball he liked, but, wasn't his leading force. And he was playing in a men's league game at Farmingdale. And Mike Liederman was running a men's league, the Storm baseball, and they're playing a game there. And, Mike calls me and he goes, "Hey, you got to see this 16-year-old kid. He's throwing and he is incredible." And I'm like, "Where are you at?" And he's like, "At my men's league tournament." And I'm like, "Why is a 16-year-old pitching in your men's league?" And he was pitching for Troy baseball. And so I drove over there, and, Rooney was like 84, 86 at that time. And, I was really shocked, like you don't usually see a 6'5" kid with that. I mean, he looked like he did. He just 84, 86. So afterwards we talk, and, he hadn't thought about college much. I think he was going to go to Siena, I think, if nothing really came up. And then we did a visit, and he was going down to South Carolina for vacation, and then came back. And then he calls me on a Wednesday. I was at Len Scoros's house. The girls were swimming in the backyard with his family. And John Rooney calls me and he goes, "Hey, Coach, I think I'm going to come to Hofstra." And I'm like, "Well, heck yeah, let's go." And I go, "Can I ask you why?" And he goes, "I've been thinking about it." He goes, if I go to Hofstra and I do well in the CAA, then, I'm a really good pitcher." And he goes, "And if I go, to a smaller school and, don't do well, then," he goes, "I was only a kid that was good in his hometown when he was growing up in Hoosick Valley." He goes, "I want to really see if I'm any good at baseball, and, see if I'm any good at this." And I'm like, "Well, let's go, buddy."
And he sure was, right?
He was unbelievable. And, just even his personality is kind of like, at first nobody knew him. And then at the end, he was, could have done the ESPYs and, could have led a lot of things. He was just really popular among the student body, and his whole personality came out.
And then that 2018 team, I have a couple questions about this next area. Your team throws 2 no-hitters that season, one combined no-hitter involving John. I guess my first question is, at what point in a game does a head coach realize what's going on, that it's more than just 3 innings in type of thing?
Well, so Lamar, that was crazy game. So we lose 2 games on Friday night. Rooney loses and Silas loses. So to think we were going to go in and win 2 on Saturday without Rooney or Silas on the mound wasn't, in our cards. And in my thought process, I'm thinking, well, hey, let's figure it out, get a game here and figure it out. But then Brad Camarda has a great freshman start, and We get a great relief appearance and we win in extra innings. And so then we pull game one of the doubleheader. And so then it's, Seamus Brazil. Seamus had been with us for 3 years. He just kind of does. And, he throws 83 to 85, throws strikes in and out, has a little bit of a breaking ball. And, I'm thinking, well, I need 4 innings from him. I have Jimmy Joyce behind him as his freshman year. Jimmy could get us a couple innings and, trying to figure it out. So it was like I think it was the 5th inning and somebody had gotten on by a walk. And I went over to Habian and I go, hey, Habes, we got to start thinking about Jimmy. And he goes, I'm in, but Seamus has a no-hitter going. And I'm like, what?
So you had no idea in the 5th inning.
I had no idea in the 5th because he'd gotten into a little trouble. Like we had made an error, he'd walked 2, but no hits. And just, in your head, you're thinking 5th inning, Hofstra baseball. Hey, we give up hits. There it is. And so Habes goes, how about this? Let's go with him until he gives up his first hit. And I'm like, all right. And there, Seamus just kept rolling along. And then he gave up first and second. And it's in
what inning is that?
The 9th, I think, right? Is that the 9th inning was first and second, 2 outs or 1 out. And I had made a defensive replacement. I think the guy made an error in that inning. Avian was about to strangle me. Dan Page, who ended up coaching with us. And he gets a ground ball, double play ball. And we go to throw it to first. And whoever throws it to first, I think our second baseman, Mikey, he bounces the ball. And so instead of a double play, it looks like it's going to be an error and get past Rob Weishire. And the guy that was on second is rounding third trying to score. And I'm like, they're going to tie the game. And it's a 1-0 game at this time. I forgot that part of the story. It's a 1-0 game. And the ball skips and Rob Weishire catches it. And I remember this is me and Habian standing right next to us. All we're yelling is, throw it home. Throw it home. And then I remember Matt Wessinger's about 5 feet outside the dugout yelling at Rob, throw it home. And finally, Rob lobs it home. Vito tags the guy that's trying to score from second. And, in the most uncharacteristic way to end a no-hitter, that was how we ended a no-hitter, was throwing a guy out at the plate trying to score from second on a ground ball. And everybody was going crazy. And just being on that bus after that game was one of my best experiences in coaching. Just that team went crazy and had so much fun. And that was the year we went to Dominican right before that.
So that no-hitter is the first one in Hofstra baseball history. And I think even Seamus would say maybe the unlikely person to do it. But kind of as that game ends and you're realizing, this is something that just doesn't happen. And it's certainly, what kind of, do you remember your conversation you had with him after it? Kind of whether it was a congratulations, what you said to him after the game?
Seamus, he just, the thing I love about him is that he goes about his business. And I always know that you can count on Seamus to throw strikes or Seamus to go out there and get his job done. And, I tell the kids this all the time. Never Seamus has ever told me his arm is sore or it doesn't feel good or whatever. Seamus just goes and does. And, for him to go 9 innings in his first start is crazy. That doesn't happen in this day and age, but his pitch count was really good because, he was just throwing strikes and they were popping the ball up in the air or making outs early. So that was really good. And his velocity didn't drop much, but, just his demeanor was the perfect demeanor to throw a no-hitter, to be honest, because it's kind of what Seamus does. He doesn't get too nervous. He doesn't get too fired up. And, to talk to him afterwards, I don't think, we were stunned. Seamus might have been more stunned. And, he was such a good kid and he got a lot of recognition for it, but he didn't know how to do interviews very well or talk to people. And it was just a crazy experience and it overwhelmed him a little bit, I think.
So you go from not having ever had a no-hitter at Hofstra to then shortly after that, your team throws another no-hitter and this one's a combined no-hitter. Can you talk us through that one? Did you realize this one before the 5th inning?
No, same thing. Rooney's throwing and, he's dominating and we're in a close game again. And it was cold that day. I remember it was like 40 some degrees and not too great. And Habes came over. Where
were we at again? Was this on a neutral site game?
We were at a neutral site game at UMBC. We were in a tourney with them. And I think Mount St. Mary's is who we were playing. And Habes came over to me about the fifth, and he's like, "Hey, Rooney hurt something in his rib. He thinks he's fine, but just wanted to give you a heads up of it." And I'm like, "Well, we can't mess with the franchise." And so I'm like, I didn't want him to get hurt in cold weather. I went and asked Rooney. He usually doesn't say anything, and he was like, he goes, "I just don't feel great." And so we pull him, and I wanted to go to Seamus because I knew we were going to get strikes, and he was going to throw strikes. And then it was about the seventh inning again. Here we are. We know the kids all knew it. I didn't know until about the seventh that we had a no hitter, and the kids.
You really didn't know till the seventh inning?
Didn't know until about the seventh, and so then I remember in the eighth inning, there's 2 outs, nobody on, a 1-2 count on the batter, and Seamus throws a perfect pitch, strike 3 all day. The umpire, the kid, everybody froze, and the umpire doesn't call strike 3. And I remember the umpire leaning on me, and he kind of waves. He feels bad that he misses the call, and I'm like, "We got a no hitter going here. You can't be missing calls." And the kid swings, and he hits one of those end of the bat nubbers to the third baseman. The ones that are a check swing single your whole life. You've watched it on baseball a million times. And he does it, and you could feel the air come out of our dugout right when you see the ball happening. And Dan Page comes running in, bare hands it, and when he throws it, he screams, "Ah!" And he throws the guy out at first base, and we're all going crazy. It was an incredible play. Dan hadn't played that much, previous up until that weekend, and that's when started his career at third base, and maybe one of the best defensive third basemen in Hofstra history. I've never seen anybody play better than him, and it started with that game on that no hitter on that Friday. It was crazy, and then he had a pretty easy ninth inning, and he gets a pop up to end it, and here it is, Seamus Brazil, 2 no hitters.
2 questions. They always say that there's plays and no hitters are perfect games. Like, you kind of know something special is going on. I guess that play down the third base line kind of told you that something special was going on again.
Looking back, obviously after a game, you always think back to stuff. And the very first play of the game, Rooney was pitching. He threw a fastball. You could tell that the hitter was, geared up for fastball, and he hits a line drive missile right at Mikey Reisner at second base. And Mikey makes a great play. Take a bad hop. It hits his glove, flicks off a little bit. He throws the guy out at first base on a bang play. Pretty sure, it's not going to get ruled an error because it was hit so hard. And, off of Mikey made a really good play to glove side. And, there it could have been, you lost a no hitter on the very first pitch of the game. And, looking back afterwards, Dan Page's play, but, Mikey made a great play to start the game. And it was just, I didn't process that until afterwards. And, we're talking at dinner time about it after.
Do you so what's the conversation this time with Seamus? Is it just laughter that he's now been involved in 2? Like, what's the post-game greeting with that one?
Listen, nobody more in disbelief than me and Habes and everybody. And Seamus is laughing, and the guys were there because usually when you think no hitters or you think strikeouts, guys throwing 90 some miles an hour, dominating stuff. And nothing against Seamus. I've loved him his whole career, but that's just not who he is. He's a strike thrower, 83 to 85. Some days a little bit better, some days a little worse, and just a breaking ball that he can throw in. And he's not the guy that you would picture throwing 2 no hitters in Hofstra history. And then what was funny is by him being 6'9" and throwing the 2 no hitters, I think when people faced him, they're all expecting 95 miles an hour and, electric breaking ball and all of this stuff. And, not expecting what had happened with it. But yeah, Seamus, the one thing that was tough is, he just got a lot of recognition after that. And it was really hard for him to settle back in mentally because, he wasn't used to it.
But just really looking back when he settles down and 10 years, 20 years down the line, and he looks back at his collegiate baseball career and just a remarkable, very short stretch of his career being involved in his own no-hitter, and then combining with John Rooney on one is just a really remarkable feat for him.
Legendary. I mean, 2 no hitters to be a part of on Division I, and Seamus Brazil did it all in 1 year, all within 2 months of the season. And and maybe if Rooney makes it to the big leagues, he can say, "I combined with that guy for a no hitter."
Right, exactly. So we have about like 5 more minutes, Coach. You good?
I am.
Okay, so let's I got some quick hitters here. Let's talk about a few different topics. When you're kind of developing a player, how do you know, when do you feel that you kind of see that the person's good, has pro potential? When, like, let's take John Rooney, for example. At what point in his development did you say, I think this kid could be a draft pick and make the major leagues?
A lot of people would say, his freshman fall, we could all tell John Rooney was going to be good. But I think that they don't put as high a value on professional baseball as I do, because I've seen a lot of players make it and be there. But to me, it was his sophomore summer in the Cape Cod League. It seems like about midway through that summer in the Cape, he finally figured out where he stood on the food chain. And when he came back from that summer, you could tell that he just had a different work ethic, and his pitch ability was always there, but it was the mindset. And, I say this like about him, say it about Danny. Danny was a first team All American or a first team All Conference player as a junior, but he didn't get drafted. Same thing as a senior, same player, same body, same everything, but it was all his mindset. And, I think the same for Austin right now for us is, last year is a midway through his sophomore year, not doing great, but then he got better and then he changed his mindset in the summer. And then this spring, he was the best hitter in the CIA. So a lot is ability, but a lot is also their mindset and determination to want to become it.
You can't, the answer to this question can't be Rooney and can't be Coma. Best players, give me 2 or 3 best players you've ever coached at Hofstra during your 12 years on campus.
We just had a recent one. Vito Friscia is a great one. I thought he had a great career, 4-year starter, and then gets picked by the Phillies. I was always a big Dalton Rouleau fan. Chris Weiss has a special place in my heart for how much he gave up for Hofstra baseball. He was a starter or a reliever. That 2018 club, he would pitch an inning or 2 on Friday and then 3 or 4 on Sunday. And he was just—
that was a remarkable season for him. It felt like he was pitching every day.
It did. It felt bad to us too. Like, I'd feel bad about it. And Chris is like, I got it. And, and Chris and I still stay in contact, and he thanks me for stuff. And I'm always thanking him for that year. He never turned me down. And man, he threw at Wilmington and he had electric stuff on a Friday night, and he closed out a Rooney win. And he was like 94 and blowing it by him. And I remember talking to Habes, and I'm like, hey, he had great stuff. And he looked at me and he goes, well, he had 6 days off. And so, like, when he could have had normal rest, I think he could have been a pro player also, or been a draft pick. And so, those guys that gave it all, and, we're all about Hofstra baseball, are the guys that, sit with me. And, Vito loves Hofstra. He bleeds royal blue, and, he's followed it. And same with Dalton and Matt Fords of the world, and Cody Normans, those guys, David DeRicos, Brett Schreiber, they live and die. Brett Schreiber came as a walk-on, and then his senior year, he gets a win or a save every conference weekend of his spring career. And, he was incredible. And, there was just guys that I saw where they came in their freshman year and what they left as seniors. And to be honest, that's my favorite part of coaching, to see how they leave.
2-pronged question here. You're the best non-conference win and the best non-conference series win you can during your 12, either as a head coach or an assistant.
Beating Purdue this year was pretty good. The bad part of that is I felt like we should have won all 4 games, against them. And, to beat any team from the Power 5 is, big time to us, I think, at Hofstra. Like, we understand how hard it is to do that. I say it, I'm a hypocrite for doing it. Winning the game at Troy, as much as I hated beating Coach Smart, that team went to a regional. They won their conference. It was a really big win. We had a win against Liberty 2 years ago at Liberty. They ended up being a regional team. I thought that they were a really good club. So we've had some really good hidden wins that off of good clubs, over the years.
And then we'll kind of finish up with a couple questions here. The CAA, what biggest series win you've had during your career in the conference? Is there one that stands out to you? Is it a Wilmington win? Is it a VCU win? Is it which one kind of stands out to you? You recently had a sweep over Wilmington. I point out to my friend down there a lot, Tom Reardon.
I'm sure Tom loves that. We'll get a tweet from him right after this, I would think. Um, no, we swept Charleston twice at home. I think that that's incredible, to do that twice. We did it, every other year when they were here. I think a super cool thing was Rob Weishire hits the walk off on Sunday to help us sweep Charleston. A year later, we sweep Wilmington, and Rob Weishire hits a walk off on Sunday to sweep Wilmington almost a year later, almost to the date. And I saw him coming to the plate, and I'm like, no way does he hit another home run to walk this off. And first pitch on a 94-mile-an-hour fastball, he hits it out the left. And I remember it being in slow motion. I think Sean Roush was on second base, and I'm watching it, and then I'm looking, and I'm like, did we just win? Because we came down from like 5 or 6 down in the ninth to win that game, and for Rob to hit 2 walk-offs and to help us with 2 sweeps over Charleston and Wilmington in our conference is incredible.
And then we kind of end it this way with most of the coaches here. You're a big time family man, married with kids. Kind of what has Stacy, your wife, and your children meant to you this journey? And yours has been a journey. It's been as we talked about. There's been a little maze you put on the United States here. What have they meant to you in your journey, and kind of how much do they mean to you when whether you see them at games or you hear from them when you're on the road and stuff like that?
No, I couldn't have done any of this without my wife. Like, she's amazing. She was a college athlete, so she gets a lot of the stuff like when I'm at practices or recruiting. And I really appreciate you asking a question and involving her, because she deserves all the recognition in the world. And the neat thing for me with my kids is, when this all started in 2012 as the head coach and 2008 at Hofstra as the assistant, I remember Haley and Laney growing up and like hanging out in the softball offices or hanging out in the volleyball offices with Christina, and then following everything. And then the 2012 club, obviously they followed all the games and knew all the kids. And so when we had that Zoom call, it was so neat for Haley and Laney to get on the call with all of those guys and see them 6 years later, 8 years later. And obviously they're older and the kids are older, and just for their memories, to hear them talk about stuff that they loved and stuff that they remember. And Laney's birthday falls on March 27th, and it's always during the year, and every year the team does something for her. And I think Kevin Weishire started that tradition, like getting her a cake and doing stuff, and usually we let her ride on the bus with us for a game. And those are invaluable memories that they have. And this year my daughter Haley did something really funny. She's a sophomore in high school, and for every weekend we were playing, she had the opposing team sweatshirt. So when we opened up against Purdue, I'm here talking to her, and she's wearing a Purdue sweatshirt, and so I had to show it to the team, and I'm like, this is what I live with at my house. And she was all fired up. They were going to be in Florida with us when we were playing Dartmouth when the season got canceled, and she had already had a Dartmouth t-shirt and stuff, and she thinks that by me being mad at her, it gets me fired up to want to win and beat the other team and stuff. So just they've been in and out of this room a few times, just even tonight, to hear the stories and listen about the stuff. And Hofstra's allowed them to have some great memories that I'm so appreciative of.
Well, John, it's been a great hour talking about these memories from your time before Hofstra. It's now remarkable 12 years on campus here at Hofstra, and obviously closing with you talking about your family. We thank you for your time. We wish you well, and wish you continued safety, and be safe and be well and during this time.
Same to you, Stephen. Thank you for all your support. I mean, right in 2012, you always say this, is you remember your times when stuff was at its worst, but that year I didn't know what I was doing, but I remember you and Cindy Lewis and people texting me and being like, congrats, keep going. And those are all stuff I'll never forget. And so thank you for all that you've done helping me and the team, and we always appreciate all your guys' support, always.
Well, thanks, John, and we'll talk again soon. Have a great night.
Thanks, Stephen.